Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture, and we've got a new solo album review. I'm finally going to be talking about the newest project from Denzel Curry, Melt My Eyez, See Your Future. I feel like this is an album I've been waiting for Denzel Curry to make for some time now, because he's proven time and time again he can make the bangers, from the darker street-level snapshots on Imperial, which has aged amazingly well for the record, to the more stylized and experimental side of Taboo that I really wish I liked as much as everybody else, to the throwback Miami mixtape side of Zoo, which I would still argue deserves more credit for doing exactly what it's designed to do quite well. But in every step of the way, it's been hard to escape the feeling that he could be doing a little bit more, especially as a lyricist, go a little bit deeper, especially given how blunt his introspection was. He clearly had that potential, but it felt like for all the fury, we were still a step away from getting to the real heart of it. He certainly had the flows to go there, plus all the energy, the intensity, but it feels like there was another level we hadn't quite seen, and that was honestly quite exciting, if only just for the potential. So after the unlocked Kenny Beats collab project, which was fine enough for what it was, we started seeing singles for this album, and I was immediately intrigued, because while the songs didn't quite seem to bang as hard, they had a slightly more thoughtful, meditative vibe with slightly more abstract lyricism, and that could make for a really cool listen. I wasn't sure where the production was gonna go, given that the singles seemed to have a little bit of a throwback vibe again, but when you see JPEG Mafia in the credits alongside Thundercat, it gave me the impression that this could go sideways, but in fascinating ways, and I really wanted to sink my teeth into this. So what did we get? Well, I think it might just be Denzel Curry's best album to date. Probably one of the best albums of 2022. Not just his most expansive, balanced, and by far his best produced, but also the sort of thoughtful album that doesn't just showcase that depth that was always lurking just beneath the surface, but also justifies why it might have just always been out of view, although with an album like this, I'm not sure that'll be the case anymore. I'm not sure if you can go back. Because an album like this, it isn't just transitional, it's transformational. Not just in how Denzel Curry structures all his flows, fully capable of all that intensity, but more measured and nuanced where he'll just unleash it, but also in terms of his cadence, his word choice, even his command of melody. He comes across as immediately more mature and pensive and simultaneously approachable, partially for as many places on this album he calls back to an older brand of alternative hip-hop circa the golden age. He references De La Soul, but I also appreciate how he doesn't just lodge himself in that territory as a plea for respectability. Unlike, say, Danny Brown's last project, Denzel Curry is fusing the old school with a lot of modern touches, even leaning into trap. In fact, while a lot of folks tend to find X-Wing as the most contentious song on the project, I actually really love it. Not just for the gorgeous production with the wailing strings and the cascades on the keyboards, but just how well Denzel Curry can lean into auto-tune crooning while still maintaining his own personality in the bragging. Yeah, it's a flex, but with the string of nerdy reference points that pepper the album and remind me a lot of Nostalgic 64, it's a song which gives the track character. It's his own. And not for nothing, everybody steps up to deliver alongside of him. I might have wished for a longer verse from JID on Ain't No Way, similar to Thundercat's abbreviated presence on the G-Funk infused The Sound of Death, but when Rico Nasty goes off, Black actually drops a really good hook, as the slowthai opposite the breakbeat on Zatoichi, and then T-Pain of all people steals the entire damn show on Troubles? That's impressive. Still wish we could have got a JPEG Mafia verse, but different conversation. But not for nothing, the production is absolutely striking and falls into that similar middle ground between the old and the new, while still feeling defiantly like Denzel Curry has made it his own. Walkin is probably the song that encapsulates this the best. Coming off of a perfect transition from the opening track, it might pick up some glassy, old school boom bap crunch off the cooing vocal sample and the liquid bass, but then that hook comes around sound, and it flips into trap damn near seamlessly. I think a major factor as to why the transitions work so well, beyond the fact that Denzel Curry has always had a great ear for melody and hooks, and that's all over this album, even if a couple songs can feel a little bit on the short side, but that's pretty typical of today's day and age. But it's that the percussion as a whole, it's some of the best I've heard on a rap album in a long time, regardless of subgenre. The vintage grooves have a lot of swagger and texture, where they've got crunch and presence, but they never overpower the tunefulness of these mixes. But when the songs switch to a more contemporary trap vibe, that bladed knock maintains some of that crisp presence. And well, of course you could expect JPEG Mafia to deliver that sort of production on John Wayne, especially with how he peppers the songs with gunshots opposite that chalky, distorted flip. The last, it feels like a resurrected song from Imperial, and just how well it balances out its haunted, darker trap tones. Same with the off-kilter clank of Troubles, or how Sanjuro feels like it was yanked from the darkest moments of Taboo, except a lot better mastered to boot. Then there's Zatoichi, which I already reviewed on TikTok, but it's only grown on me since, with all that breakbeat percussion, the windswept distortion around him, and the striking feminine vocals that will saturate the melody, as they do across the majority of this album. And given just how many samples are flipped, and how much of this album switches up its groove, a lot of credit to Robert Glasper for contributing to the keyboards and production, it's the other factor as to why this album has such impeccable flow, where even running for 45 minutes, it feels shorter, to the point where Denzel Curry could have easily tacked on more than a few more verses. I would have had no issues. It's got that much of a vibe. But again, the big leap was always going to have to come with the content, and where I'm thrilled to say that Denzel Curry did take that leap, and he's focusing on the bigger picture. Thematically, the album's title is kind of fascinating, because it represents an increased self-awareness of the systems that might surround him, where you are forced to look outside of yourself and then contextualize the larger world. Well, it kind of breaks you a bit. It melts and deconstructs your previous perspective, where it doesn't just showcase what your future could be, but also that of everyone else around him. I'm not sure what might have caused that paradigm shift for him. On the very first song, he references a lot of guilt and even a past sexual trauma in which he's on the long road to heal. And while there's always been a therapeutic angle going back to Taboo, this time he's placing it alongside the larger conditions of his own success within these systems in the larger world, which reminds me a little bit of what Armand Hammer explored on Haram, especially in contextualizing that success. But in embracing deconstruction and a lot of those sober second thoughts, you get some pretty fascinating moments, not just in the sharply pointed critiques of systems that have failed the black community or leaders who have failed to teach or uplift those within it, but then you get tracks like John Wayne, where he doesn't just highlight the power that might come with the gun and the power fantasy, but also how he'd have to be more likely to use it against police, and that raises an interesting juxtaposition. I do question why in a couple songs he mentions social media canceling, given that that kind of misses the mark of more systemic critique, but all things considered, it is pretty minor, especially as he realizes that real systemic change does not come from empty posts on social media. And while saying his material might be too smart for radio, might be pushing it, I mean, he's not wrong that the sort of systemic critique that he is now pursuing is usually only considered seriously by a select group of artists of which he hasn't been before, and even fewer who are given mainstream success and attention. And one thing that I genuinely appreciated is how he outright mentions why his material did not go deeper before on Sanjuro. That sometimes he's speaking for those who don't have that depth, and it shouldn't invalidate their lived-in emotional experiences or their trauma. There's value in being simple, direct, and powerful. Now, keep in mind, he did touch on a lot of this on Taboo, be it some of his own suicidal impulses, the feelings of distrust and isolation only intensified the past couple of years, especially when his story is then commodified by rappers who not only did not live that life, but can't afford the lives they pretend to live. But the framing is less of a nihilistic wallow this time, and that continued trudge forward, it's a sign of maturity, tangible wisdom and improvement, He'll admit he doesn't have the bigger answers outside of himself. Zatoichi emphasizes how much it can feel like the blind leading the blind, but someone's gotta do it. And that expands into the larger scope of this album, and especially around legacy. More often than not, Denzel Curry highlights not just his age and his bodies of work in comparison with his peers, but even legends within hip-hop, and how he's now older than many of them lived to be. Less as idols, more as inspiration in the systems that he's being forced to examine. The Run the Jewels reference is very telling, great bit of wordplay too. But that takes us to the closing track, The Ills. Arguably the most dense song on the album that he'll freely admit that many won't get, but also by far the most revealing. Not just in highlighting his struggles with mental health, but also how he now has to frame his mission, building off of his lone samurai, lone gunman motifs to highlight a dishonor he may have committed or vices to which he may have succumbed, which he must now correct. But even then, by participating in a corruptive capitalistic system to find his therapy, he's self-aware that he might be dragging more people into this nightmare if just by inspiration. And he exposes the risk of not just engaging with that system, but also how he's previously flipped a lot of very dark iconography to plumb those depths, where you're reminded that he's called himself a black metal terrorist, which might be a very true expression of his pain and trauma, but will cast him way closer to an anti-hero in a world where he's now all the more cognizant of the impact of his actions. And to show that he understands the weight of that newfound responsibility, look to the final lines of the second verse. Play the bad guy just to finish the race first, because the last guy was nice, but he ended up dying of thirst. That's a Kendrick Lamar reference, and it's a dark parallel, but it's one that works. Both are men of very strict principle, aware of their own vices and their own failures. The leader and the good man who spends his art trying to cling to his morals amidst a broken system, and one of a darker stripe, who have seen the dreadful cost exacted and indulged openly in that darkness to salve his wounds, but has come out stronger and wiser, and may last longer. And you know, there may have been a time I wouldn't have put Denzel Curry on that pedestal, made that parallel, but with this album he's proved that he's earned his spot in that conversation if he hadn't already. It's not just amazingly well produced with terrific flow, multiple excellent hooks, a lot of sharp wordplay, and a lot more refined versatility. It shows a much wiser MC that still has all that intensity, just a keener eye as to where to deploy it. And yeah, it took me a little bit longer than I'd like to get into this in general, but the layers made the expedition, made it all worth it. One of the best albums of 2022, extremely high recommendation. Check this out. Trust me, it's worth it. But yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be extremely grateful. Again, I am very late to getting to this, but again, it's layered, it's kind of complex. There's a vibe to this album. I wanted to make sure I put in my due diligence. Sometimes that happens. Also, I've been very busy. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys will have a lot of your opinions on the album, comments down there, have fun. And if you guys want to potentially engage with me directly, or support the channel, or get albums on my schedule, link to my Patreon is right over there. Got a couple more solo reviews coming up, but hey, if you guys want to get involved in that process, don't have to, no obligation, but options available. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.